Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be tackling the I Ching,
Ooh, fun.
this ancient Chinese text that's, kind of shrouded in a little bit of mystery.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using as our guide a book by Carol K. Anthony. It's called A Guide to the I Ching.
Sounds good.
Now, some of you listening out there might already be familiar with the I Ching.
Right.
You might have even, tried your hand at tossing the coins or using the yarrow stalks to kind of divine some answers.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're really interested in doing today is kind of going beyond that, that fortune-telling aspect and really kind of sitting with the I Ching as if it were a wise old sage, just
Yeah.
kind of gleaning wisdom from it.
I like that.
And for those of you who are completely new to the I Ching, it's basically a system of 64 hexagrams, each made up of 6 lines.
Okay.
And these hexagrams offer interpretations and guidance for all sorts of different situations that we face in life.
Interesting.
And one of the things that's really cool about the I Ching is it's not like you're going to get a straight-up answer.
Yeah.
It's more like what's holding up a lantern
Okay.
to illuminate your own situation, to help you to see it with more clarity.
So it's more about giving you like the tools or like a framework for understanding.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, you're going on this journey, and the I Ching is kind of that guide that's
Yeah.
helping you along the way.
The mentor.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive, is we're really going to explore how we can apply the wisdom of the I Ching to our own lives.
Awesome.
Whether we're talking about relationships or challenges that we face or, just trying to figure out what it all means.
Right.
So one of the first things that I think is important to kind of understand about the I Ching is this idea of the superior man.
Okay, the superior man.
Yeah. Now, don't let the name kind of throw you off here.
Yeah.
It's not about gender. It's more about like an archetype.
Gotcha.
Replicating the best version of ourselves, the potential that we all have for wisdom and virtue.
Right.
And kind of along with this idea of the superior man, we also have the inferiors.
The inferior.
Yeah, now these aren't like, evil villains or anything like that.
Right.
But it's more about like those little voices inside us.
Those weaknesses.
Exactly, those impulses, the weaknesses that we all struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
And the I Ching doesn't say that we have to like get rid of them entirely.
Right.
It's more about like recognizing them, disciplining them, and maybe even learning to work with them.
Integrating them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like that old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah, I like that.
The more we understand our inferiors, the more we can kind of integrate them into our whole selves.
Right.
And actually maybe even use them to our advantage.
And it's interesting because Anthony actually uses this analogy of the white knight.
Oh, the White Knight. Tell me more about that.
So she talks about how, sometimes our ego pretends to be this heroic figure fighting evil.
Okay.
But really, the real battle is within ourselves. It's about recognizing our own biases and striving for balance.
That makes a lot of sense.
So it's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about just being honest with ourselves about who we are, flaws and all.
Right. Yeah. And so how do we actually start to put this into practice
Yeah.
in our lives?
Well, the I Ching gives up some really practical techniques, and one of those is this idea of holding together.
Holding together.
Yeah, and it's about creating inner unity, not just, mentally, but also morally and spiritually.
Right.
It's about aligning our actions with our values.
So it's kind of like creating that wholeness within ourselves.
Exactly. And that inner unity, that holding together, is actually the foundation for everything else. Strong relationships, achieving our goals, even just feeling at peace with ourselves.
Right. Yeah. It's like if you think about, building a house.
Yeah.
You need that strong foundation to support everything else.
Exactly.
And in this case, that foundation is our, inner integrity.
Exactly. Now, there's this other concept that I think is really cool, and that is this idea of biting through.
Biting through.
Yeah, it sounds kind of intense.
It does.
But it's really about, having a firm but adaptable approach to life.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that actually look like in like a real life situation?
So imagine you're facing a challenge, right? Maybe it's a conflict with someone, or maybe a tough decision that you have to make. Biting through means staying true to your principles, not giving up easily, but also being willing to adapt and adjust your approach as needed.
Okay.
So it's about being strong, but flexible.
So not being rigid or stubborn.
Right. It's about finding that balance between firmness and flexibility, knowing when to hold your ground and when to bend.
I like that.
And then there's this other really important concept going on, and this one is all about perseverance.
Okay.
Accepting those ups and downs that we all experience and just, keep going.
Keep on trucking.
Exactly, no matter what.
Yeah, I think we all need a little bit of that going on in our lives.
Yeah, especially when things get tough, right?
Yeah.
And it reminds us that life is a journey, not a destination. And, there's going to be bumps along the way, but it's about embracing the whole ride, the good and the bad.
Yeah, so we've got holding together, biting through going on. Are there any other key principles that we should be kind of aware of here?
Well, there's this idea of nourishment,
Nourishment.
and it's about being mindful of what we feed our minds and hearts.
Okay.
Recognizing that what we consume shapes who we become.
So not just what we eat,
Not just what we eat.
but also what we read, what we watch, who we hang out with.
all of that.
Even our own thoughts.
Absolutely.
So being conscious of what we're taking in.
Exactly. And choosing things that uplift us and help us grow.
Yeah, okay, so now we've talked about the I Ching as this system of wisdom. But how do we actually tap into its guidance?
Right.
How do we actually use it?
Well, remember those hexagrams we talked about?
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those has a specific meaning and offers interpretations, for different situations. And, traditionally, people have used the I Ching for divination, right? Using coins or euro stocks. Yeah. But Anthony also suggests that, we can study the hexagrams and their interpretations as a way to understand ourselves and the world around us.
So it's almost like having this conversation with the I Ching itself.
Exactly. It's about reflecting on the wisdom that's contained within each hexagram and finding ways to apply it to our own lives.
So it's less about, predicting the future and more about kind of gaining insights and understanding.
Exactly. And the more we study the I Ching, the more we start to see its wisdom reflected in our own experiences.
That's really cool. And I'm starting to see how this could be really powerful.
Yeah.
So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll dive into some specific examples of how the I Ching can help us to navigate those relationships, face challenges, and maybe even find our purpose.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into, how we can actually start to apply this wisdom in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think a good place to start is with relationships.
Okay.
Because, let's face it, relationships could be complicated.
They sure can.
And the I Ching doesn't shy away from that.
Right.
It really kind of offers some guidance for how to navigate the messiness of relationships. And a good place to start, I think, is with the hexagram of the family.
The family. Okay.
Yeah, so this hexagram really emphasizes the importance of building strong foundations in our relationships.
Right.
Starting with sincerity and humility.
Okay.
It's about recognizing the inherent value in each person. Treating everyone with respect, even when we disagree.
Right.
And so obviously, this makes sense in the context of a family.
Right.
But how do we apply this to relationships outside of, our immediate family?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the principles of the family hexagram can actually be applied to any relationship, whether it's with friends, coworkers, or romantic partners. It's about creating that space where everyone feels seen and heard and valued.
Right. So it's about fostering that sense of belonging and connection that's so essential for, any healthy relationship.
Exactly. And then we have the hexagram of influence.
Influence, okay.
And this one is all about being authentic and true to ourselves.
Okay.
It suggests that real influence comes from living in alignment with our values, letting our actions speak louder than words.
So not about, trying to manipulate or control others,
Right.
but really inspiring them through our own integrity.
Exactly. And that kind of influence has a much more lasting impact because it's built on trust and respect, not coercion or manipulation.
Right now, we all know that relationships aren't always smooth sailing.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens when we hit those inevitable bumps in the road?
Right. Well, the I Ching offers guidance for those tough times, too. It doesn't pretend that challenges don't exist, but it helps us to see them as opportunities for growth and transformation.
Right. So those challenges are actually invitations to learn and evolve.
Exactly. And it gives us specific tools, to navigate those challenges. And one of those is the hexagram of obstruction.
Obstruction, that doesn't sound very promising.
It might not sound pleasant, but it's actually a really valuable hexagram because it helps us to recognize and deal with those obstacles that inevitably arise in life, whether it's in relationships or work or personal growth.
So not about pretending that the problems don't exist. It's about facing them head on and figuring out how to work through them.
Exactly. And sometimes working through those obstacles requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to see things from a different angle. And that's where the hexagram of breakthrough comes in.
Breakthrough. Okay, now that sounds more like it. Tell me about that one.
Well, imagine you've been wrestling with a problem for a while, and then suddenly something clicks, you have that aha moment, and you see a solution that's breakthrough.
Oh, okay, so it's like those moments of clarity and insight that kind of allow us to move past that impasse.
Exactly. And sometimes those breakthroughs come from, you know, unexpected places, from challenges that force us to think outside the box and come up with creative solutions.
Now, I'm curious about this idea of the taming power of the great.
Okay, yeah.
Um, what is that all about?
Well, this hexagram is all about mastering our own inner world, especially those impulses and emotions that can sometimes, lead us astray.
Right, so it's about self-discipline,
Exactly.
about recognizing our triggers and finding ways to respond in a more skillful way.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that, our reactions and behaviors have a huge impact on our relationships, and that by cultivating, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, we can actually create, more harmonious connections.
Yeah, it sounds like, a lifelong journey of self-discovery and mastery.
It is, but the I Ching reminds us that it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of journeys, we talked about nourishment earlier,
Right.
and this concept also applies to, our emotional and spiritual well-being,
A-
right? It's about being mindful of what we're feeding our minds and hearts and recognizing that, our thoughts and emotions shape who we become.
Exactly. And sometimes we need to nourish ourselves with stillness and reflection, and that's where I Ching meditation comes in.
Oh, okay. I Ching meditation. This is what I've been waiting for. Tell me about this.
Well, Anthony talks about approaching I Ching meditation with an open mind, a sincere effort and a willingness to be patient with the process. It's not about emptying the mind, but it's more about creating a space for deeper understanding to kind of emerge.
So less about, controlling our thoughts and more about kind of allowing them to flow and seeing what insights come up.
Exactly. And it can be especially helpful when we're facing, a specific challenge or seeking guidance on a particular decision.
So how does it actually work? Like, do you need any special tools or knowledge to practice this?
Not really. Anthony describes it as, a simple process of finding a quiet space, closing your eyes, and focusing on your breath to kind of calm the mind. And then you can bring to mind a specific question or situation that you'd like guidance on.
Okay, and what happens next?
Well, you just absorb what arises. It might be images or feeling or words or even just a sense of knowing.
So it's like tapping into that inner wisdom, that intuitive knowing that we all have.
Exactly. And the more we practice I Ching meditation, the more we cultivate that connection to our inner wisdom and the guidance of the I Ching.
That's really cool. And it sounds like a really powerful way to kind of access a deeper level of understanding and guidance. Now, you mentioned earlier that the I Ching offers guidance for navigating, those tough challenges.
Yes.
Can you give me like a concrete example of how that might play out in real life?
Sure. So let's say you're facing a major obstacle in your career. Maybe you're feeling stuck or unfulfilled. The I Ching's wisdom can actually help you to reframe that challenge and see it as an opportunity for growth.
Okay, so that shift in perspective can be really helpful.
Yeah.
But how do you actually apply the I Ching's principles to a situation like that?
Well, you can start by reflecting on the hexagram of obstruction, which, reminds us that challenges are an inherent part of life and that by accepting them, we actually create space for growth and transformation.
Right, so it's not about denying the challenge or trying to avoid it,
Right.
but leaning into it and seeing what we can learn from it.
Exactly. And then you can explore the hexagram of breakthrough, which encourages us to look for, creative solutions and to trust that even in the midst of difficulty, there's always a way forward.
It's like the I Ching is offering us a roadmap for navigating those tough times and helping us to see that, light at the end of the tunnel.
It is. And it also reminds us of the importance of patience and perseverance, of trusting that even when things seem darkest, there's a greater plan unfolding.
That's so reassuring. It's like the I Ching is saying, hey, I know things are tough right now, but keep going. You got this.
Exactly. Now, I'm also curious about how the I Ching addresses the idea of, finding our purpose or meaning in life.
Yeah?
Anthony talks about the importance of discovering our Tao, our unique path or calling.
Right. Yeah, and I think the I Ching is a really powerful tool for helping us to connect with our true selves and discover our purpose.
Absolutely.
It encourages us to look inward, to examine our values and our passions, and to trust our intuition.
Exactly. It's about getting to know ourselves on a deeper level and aligning our actions with our authentic selves.
Right, and one way to do that is to really pay attention to synchronicities.
Synchronicities,
Yeah,
you said.
those meaningful coincidences that seem to guide us in the right direction.
Like when you keep running into the same person or seeing the same number everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, Anthony suggests that synchronicities are actually messages from the universe,
Okay,
signs that we're on the right track.
interesting.
And the I Ching can actually help us to interpret those signs and understand their meaning.
So it's like the I Ching is a decoder ring for the universe.
That's a great way to put it.
I like that.
Now, speaking of the universe, one of the things that really resonates with me about the I Ching is its emphasis on the interconnectedness of all things,
Yeah, that's a big one.
right? It recognizes that, we're not these isolated individuals, but rather, interconnected threads in this vast and intricate web of life.
We're all connected.
Exactly. Our thoughts, our words, our actions, they all have an impact on the world around us. And we're constantly, influencing and being influenced by everything and everyone.
Like are all part of this giant ecosystem, and every action we take, creates ripples that affect the whole.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to live with, awareness and attention,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that our choices have consequences not just for ourselves, but for, the entire web of life.
So it's a call to responsibility to recognize that we're all in this together.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of gratitude comes in.
Okay.
The I Ching encourages us to cultivate a deep sense of gratitude for all the blessings in our lives.
Yeah.
Recognizing that, we are constantly receiving support from this web of life.
Yeah, it's like that saying, gratitude turns what we have into enough. The more we appreciate what we have, the less we focus on what we lack.
Exactly. And when we approach life with a grateful heart, we open ourselves to even more blessings.
Yeah.
And the I Ching reminds us that gratitude isn't just about receiving.
Right.
It's also about giving back.
Absolutely.
Right. So using our gifts and talents, to contribute to the well-being of the web of life,
Mm-hmm.
to make a positive difference in the world.
Yeah, and when we live in service to others, we not only make the world a better place, but we also cultivate a deeper sense of purpose and meaning in our own lives.
It's like that cycle of giving and receiving.
Right.
Or the more we give, the more we receive, and the more we receive, the more we have to give.
Now, one of the themes that Anthony keeps coming back to is this idea of trusting the process of surrendering to the flow of life, even when things get tough.
Yeah, that could be a hard one to wrap our heads around.
It can.
Especially when we're so used to trying to control everything.
Right. We want to be in control.
Right, yeah. But the I Ching offers a really powerful perspective on this whole concept of surrender.
Okay.
It teaches us that by letting go of our need to control outcomes, we actually open ourselves up to a world of possibilities
Right.
that we could never have imagined on our own.
It's like we're saying, okay, universe, I trust you. I'm letting go of my limited vision and embracing the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of courage
It does.
and faith, but the rewards are immeasurable.
Yeah.
When we surrender to that flow of life, we tap into a source of wisdom and guidance that's far greater than, our own limited understanding.
It's like a beautiful paradox.
It is.
By letting go of control, we actually gain more control or at least more alignment with the natural flow of life.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something that we touched on earlier, and that's this idea of the I Ching as a tool for self-development.
Right? It's not just about gaining knowledge or understanding. It's about actually using that wisdom to create positive change in our lives.
Right. And the I Ching is really, it's a practical guide to living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us to navigate challenges, to make wise choices, and to cultivate our inner potential.
It's like a personal growth manual offering us, timeless wisdom and guidance.
Exactly. And Anthony suggests using the I Ching for self-reflection.
Okay.
For taking a step back and examining our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors in light of its wisdom.
It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves, seeing those patterns and tendencies that we might not be aware of.
Exactly. And once we've identified those patterns,
Right.
we can then start to work on changing them,
Yeah.
right? On cultivating new habits and behaviors that are more aligned with our values
Mm-hmm.
and our highest good.
So it's a continuous process of self-discovery and transformation, of using the I Ching's wisdom to kind of guide us towards greater self-awareness and personal growth.
Exactly. And it's a journey that's full of surprises and insights with the I Ching as our trusted guide.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the Superior Man to biting through to I Ching meditation, it's clear that this ancient text has a lot to offer in terms of, personal growth, wisdom, and understanding.
It really does. And what's amazing is that, even after all these centuries, the I Ching's wisdom is still so relevant to our lives today.
Yeah.
It speaks to those timeless, human desires for meaning and purpose and connection.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that we all have the potential to tap into that inner wisdom and create lives that are filled with, joy and meaning and purpose.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the I Ching.
It's been an incredible journey exploring this ancient wisdom.
It has.
And I have to say, I'm feeling pretty inspired to delve deeper into the I Ching and see what other treasures I can uncover.
Me too, and I encourage all of you listening out there to do the same.
Yeah.
Anthony's book is a great place to start, and there are many other resources available.
Absolutely.
But we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive and that you've gained some valuable insights and inspiration along the way.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And until next time, may you find guidance and clarity on your journey.